The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Before we begin this journey, I want to invite you to be part of something deeper. If you're someone who believes that stories hold the power to heal, to awaken, to ignite transformation, then subscribe to this channel now. Hit the bell icon so you never miss what could be the one message that changes everything for you. Let's dive into the truth. Raw, real, and unfiltered. She trusted him with everything, her secrets, her fears, the way she laughs in silence when no one's watching. That kind of trust isn't given. It's built, slowly, across 100 moments of vulnerability. But it only took 1 second, one careless decision, for it to all collapse. Betrayal doesn't knock. It crashes through the front door with muddy boots, leaving prints on every room of your soul. And when it leaves, it doesn't apologize. It just vanishes, leaving you there, shattered, hollow, breathless. There's a kind of silence that only comes after the storm of trust has been broken. Not the peaceful silence, but the eerie, echoing one that makes your own heartbeat feel too loud. She sat there, phone still in hand, reading the last message over and over, hoping the words would somehow change, but they never do. That's the thing about truth. Once it's seen, it can't be unseen. And sometimes, the truth comes wrapped in screenshots and sobs and the bitter taste of, "I should have known." What follows isn't always rage. It's something deeper, grief. Not because of the person who betrayed you, but because of the version of yourself who believed they never would. You begin mourning a future that no longer exists. Imagine birthdays, planned trips, even the quiet Tuesday mornings drinking coffee side by side. Suddenly your mind becomes a crime scene, revisiting memories, questioning everything. Was it all a lie? Or just the ending? And yet in that darkness, something stirs. A flicker, not of forgiveness, not yet, but awareness that this pain, this unbearable weight pressing on your chest, means you're still alive, still here. And that matters, because if you're still breathing, then there's still a choice. You don't have to let this betrayal define the rest of your story. You can turn the page. But first, you have to stop rereading the last chapter. She got up, not out of strength, out of necessity. The floor was cold, the room was darker than she remembered, and her cheeks were wet. But her feet moved anyway. That's the beginning of healing. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet defiance. When you choose to move even when your soul is begging you to collapse. And it doesn't matter how slow it is. What matters is that it's forward. Somewhere between heartbreak and healing, there is a narrow space called survival. It's not pretty. It's messy and lonely and cruel. But it's sacred. Because in that space, you start to rebuild. Not the version they wanted you to be, but the version you forgot you were. Strong, fierce, whole, even in pieces. That's the paradox of pain. It can destroy, or it can rebuild. The hammer can crush, or it can forge. The choice is never easy, but it is yours. So here's what I want you to remember right now. You are not the betrayal. You are not the pain. You are the one who survived it. And that makes you dangerous in the best way. Because a heart that has been broken and still beats is the most powerful force on this earth. Never forget that. Never let it be silenced. And never, ever, let it be taken from you again. She didn't tell anyone. Not at first. How could she? The shame wrapped around her throat like a steel chain. People always ask, why didn't you say something sooner? As if speaking the truth is as simple as exhaling. But when your soul's been pierced, every breath feels like betrayal to your own silence. It wasn't about hiding. It was about surviving. About keeping the last remaining pieces of herself intact before the world started asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. And when she finally did speak, it wasn't with a scream. It was a whisper. Almost inaudible, as if testing whether the air could carry that kind of weight. The words tasted foreign in her mouth, shaped by fear and fury, and a deep ache she couldn't name. But once they were out, once they were real, something inside shifted, like opening a window in a smoke-filled room. The pain didn't leave, but for the first time, she could breathe through it. People don't talk enough about the courage it takes to confront the truth out loud, to own your wounds in front of others and say, yes, I was hurt, and yes, I'm still standing. It's not weakness, it's warfare. Because in a world that profits from silence, every truth spoken is a revolution. And revolution always begins within. In the quiet rebellion of a woman reclaiming her voice, she started writing, not for them, for her. Pages and pages of memories, thoughts, feelings she never dared say. There was no punctuation, no structure, just raw survival inked in trembling hands. And through that ink, she started to recognize herself again. Not the version she became to please others, but the one that burned beneath the surface all along. The warrior, the wild one, the woman who knew her worth even when the world tried to erase it. There were nights she couldn't sleep, nights when memories slammed into her like waves against a crumbling shoreline. But she stopped trying to hold them back. Instead, she let them crash, let them roar, let them teach her. Because every wave carried a message. You lived through this. You're still here. And that realization was louder than the storm itself. She wasn't drowning. She was learning how to swim in deeper waters. The world didn't stop for her healing. Bills still came. People still asked for things. Time kept ticking. But she moved differently now. Slower, intentional, sacred. Every step became an act of resistance. Every boundary, a monument to her rebirth. She stopped apologizing for needing space, for saying no, for protecting her energy like her life depended on it, because it did. And as the days turned into months, she found herself laughing again. Not the kind of laugh that's polite and practiced, the kind that breaks you open, that spills from your belly like honey and thunder. It wasn't happiness she had found, it was alignment, a return to self, a homecoming. And in that moment, she knew. She hadn't just survived the betrayal, she had transcended it. Some people started to notice the shift. They said things like, "You've changed," without realizing it was a compliment. Because of course, she had changed. How could she not? Pain reshapes you. It cracks open the safe places you once built inside yourself and forces you to rebuild with stronger material. She wasn't softer now. She was sharper. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. She no longer settled for crumbs when she remembered she was born of feast and fire. She stopped explaining herself. That was a powerful moment. The day she no longer felt obligated to shrink, so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable around her power. That's what healing does. It returns you to your original size, before the gaslighting, before the manipulation, before the heartbreak. She realized she didn't owe anyone an explanation for the boundaries that protected her peace. Peace is sacred, and she had bled too much to earn it. One morning she stood in front of the mirror and didn't look away. For the first time in years, she held her own gaze and didn't flinch. The woman staring back at her wasn't broken. She was forged. Eyes that had seen hell and still softened in the presence of beauty. A heart stitched back together with threads of grit and grace. She touched her own face like a prayer. This was resurrection. This was proof. She was both the wound and the weapon. There's a particular power in learning to walk away. Not out of anger, but alignment. Not slamming doors. Just quietly choosing which ones are no longer meant for you. That's how she moved now. With a calm defiance that said, "I know who I am, and I know where I'm going." She didn't need to burn bridges. She just stopped crossing them. And the peace that followed? Unmistakable. It didn't come from fixing others. It came from finally choosing herself. And she started calling things what they really were. That wasn't just a rough patch. It was emotional neglect. That wasn't love with flaws. It was control dressed up in charm. She named the monsters. She faced the ghosts. And in doing so, she disarmed them. Because the truth, when spoken without shame, is a weapon. And silence, when chosen consciously, is power. She had learned to use both. Precision, poise, power. People often think healing is a straight line, but it's not. It's a spiral, a dance. Some days she moved forward with fire in her chest. Other days she collapsed into memories that clawed at her ribs. But she kept dancing, kept rising, kept choosing herself even when it would have been easier to fall back into the old patterns. Because comfort is tempting, but freedom, real freedom, is worth the climb, even when it hurts. She no longer chased closure. That was one of her greatest victories. She understood now that not all stories get tidy endings. Sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. from choosing to end the chapter without needing permission. That's how you reclaim your narrative, by realizing you don't need someone else to hand you peace. You are the author, you are the architect, and you alone decide when the story shifts. One night, under the weight of stars too ancient to lie, she finally let go, not of the memory, but of the grip it held on her. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, just a quiet surrender, a soft unclenching of fists that had been balled for far too long. She whispered to no one and to everything, "I release you." Not for them, for her, because holding on had become a prison, and she had finally remembered how to walk free. She began creating again, not to prove anything, but to breathe. Her art wasn't pretty, it was raw. Her words weren't polished, they were true. She painted with pieces of her own soul and sang with the rasp of survival in her throat. And what poured out of her wasn't just creativity, it was medicine. Her scars became symbols, her wounds became wisdom, and people began to listen. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. There were still triggers, still shadows, but now she met them differently. Not with fear, with familiarity. Like old ghosts she no longer needed to run from. She had learned to sit with discomfort, to offer it tea and listen to its warnings, then gently ask it to leave. That's the beauty of emotional maturity. It's not about never breaking again. It's about knowing how to rebuild, faster, stronger, without losing the parts of yourself that matter most. Sometimes people from the past tried to return, with apologies, with nostalgia, with rewritten versions of the story where they were suddenly the victim. But she no longer fell for that bait. She had outgrown the need to explain her pain to people committed to misunderstanding her. Her silence wasn't bitterness, it was protection. Her distance wasn't coldness, it was wisdom. She wished them well, from a distance they earned. There was a moment, quiet, almost sacred, when she realized she no longer missed them. Not out of resentment, but because she had filled her life with people who truly saw her, who celebrated her fire and held her through her fog, who never made her question her worth. She looked around at this new circle, this new energy, and smiled. Because this peace, this presence he might was built, not found, chosen, not chased, and it was hers. One morning, she danced in her kitchen barefoot, coffee in hand, music loud. Not for anyone, just because she could. The sun streamed through the window like it was proud of her. And maybe it was, because she had turned survival into celebration, had woven grief into gold, had taken a life that once felt like it was ending and lit it on fire, not to burn it down, but to warm the next chapter. This was joy, not the fragile kind, but the earned kind. And as she stood in that light, she made a quiet vow to never betray herself again, to love herself out loud, to protect her softness with fierce boundaries, to speak even when her voice shakes, to choose peace even when chaos comes dressed as passion. Because this was no longer about healing from the past. It was about building a future that honored who she had become. And she wasn't just ready, she was already living it. Every scar tells a story, not of defeat, but of endurance. If you've made it this far, it means you're not just surviving, you're awakening. Remember what you've overcome. Remember who you are now. Whole, fierce, unshakable. Subscribe to the channel and follow Jesus, not as an idea, but as the truth that rebuilds everything from the ruins. Let this story be your turning point. I'm Oliver, and if this spoke to your spirit, know that you're never walking alone. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and never stop choosing your healing.